John Soforic retired at 49 with $20,000 a month, relying strictly on completely ordinary, mundane habits. We are heavily conditioned to measure wealth by visible status, a $700 designer jacket or a brand new Ferrari in the driveway. But those items represent money that has already vanished, hiding the reality of actual financial freedom. This chart compares a $300,000 investment banker's salary with a fast food dishwasher's wages. If the banker's massive income is wiped out by a lavish lifestyle, their saved net worth is exactly zero. The day the paychecks stop, both individuals are mathematically identical. A high income is just a flow of cash. True wealth is determined entirely by the amount of capital you manage to trap, hold onto, and keep out of the hands of other businesses. Billionaire investor Charlie Munger famously stated his intense drive to get rich had nothing to do with buying luxury goods. He desperately wanted independence. Munger was optimizing for 4 specific targets: total control over what you do, when you do it, where you do it, and who you do it with. Giving up immediate pleasures to trap your capital requires intense self-control. If your motivation is simply to impress your neighbors, you will eventually break. But if you are fighting for total autonomy over your own daily life, you have a reason to sustain the effort. The entire journey to independence starts with a single mechanical habit drawn from the oldest financial playbooks in existence. You must pay yourself first. Many people assume the solution is simply earning a higher salary, but trading income as your only variable is a highly flawed 2-part equation. It is like focusing entirely on working out to lose weight while completely ignoring your diet. When you lock in the habit of extracting a surplus from every single paycheck early on, you actually alter your psychological behavior. Living below your means stops feeling like a sacrifice and becomes as automatic and natural as riding a bicycle. Establishing that baseline surplus is the non-negotiable first step. Without a continuous supply of unspent capital, every other financial strategy in the world is useless to you. This diagram illustrates the critical economic divergence. A surplus allows you to move your money out of the consumer pathway, where you simply buy goods, and into the owner pathway, where you own the entities producing them. Think about your everyday environments. You can hand over $5 for a meal at McDonald's or a can of Monster Energy, sending your cash down the consumer track. Or you can use that same surplus to purchase shares of McDonald's or Monster stock, sending it down the owner track. Notice the final destinations here. The consumer's cash vanishes into the corporate system forever. But the owner's cash buys a permanent seat at the table, connecting to a loop that continuously generates new capital for them. You do not have to invent a brilliant tech startup to escape the working class. You just have to routinely shift your dollars from the cash register side of the transaction over to the shareholder side. It is easy to look at a single share of stock, amounting to roughly 1/1,000,000th of a massive global corporation, and assume it is completely insignificant. But that microscopic fraction legally guarantees you a cut of the company's profits in the form of dividends. You are instantly granted a permanent passive income advantage that the non-owners standing right next to you do not possess. Securing a stream of cash that is entirely disconnected from your physical labor breaks the biological limits of a standard salary. Your earning potential is no longer restricted by how many hours you can physically stay awake. In a small pond, a fish with just a slight size advantage effortlessly consumes more resources and dominates. Your initial ownership advantage yields passive income. You use that cash to buy more equity, expanding the size of your next payout, spiraling continuously upward. Eventually, hitting a tipping point, this passive income aggressively crosses over and completely dwarfs your flat, active salary. Escaping the daily grind has nothing to do with luck. By routinely taking a surplus and planting it directly into ownership, true financial freedom stops being a dream and becomes an inescapable mathematical reality. Meet Brian. He has a wife, 2 kids, and a respectable engineering job he's held for 12 straight years. He earns a decent salary, but he has never saved a dime. Brian felt perfectly content with the setup. He lived a comfortable middle-class life and assumed his regular paycheck was a permanent fixture. He didn't build a financial safety net because he didn't think he needed one. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit. As recorded on this news ticker at the time, the market began a historic decline. For Brian, this meant losing his job and his family's only source of income overnight. A global market crash is a systemic issue, but when you live paycheck to paycheck, it becomes an immediate household emergency. Without any financial buffer, Brian was entirely exposed to the elements of an economic storm. To keep his family fed, Brian took whatever gigs he could find. He worked from dusk until dawn for 3 grueling years, living in a constant state of anxiety before finally landing another stable engineering role. We often hear that aiming for wealth is a shallow pursuit, that focusing on money compromises your character or your spiritual standing. But author John Soforic argues the opposite. He compares the value of money to oxygen. You rarely notice its presence while breathing freely, but the moment you lack it, you realize it is the only thing keeping you from suffocating. Jordan Belfort, seen here, once offered a blunt assessment of this reality. I have been a rich man and I have been a poor man, and I chose rich every fucking time. Having capital provides a necessary baseline of survival. Achieving financial freedom is a noble pursuit. It removes chronic despair and the fear of ruin, providing the protection required to support the people who depend on you. Even after Brian secured his new, stable job, the memory of that fear remained. He continued working dawn to dusk hours by choice, directing his surplus into a financial buffer to ensure he would never be vulnerable to market shifts again. This illustrates a core rule from Soforic's book, The Wealthy Gardener. You rarely get the ideal condition you want out of life. Instead, you get the poorest condition you are willing to tolerate. Merely wishing for a better life gets you nowhere. If you tolerate a bad situation, it remains static. Improvement only happens when you actively reject the status quo and refuse to accept anything less than growth. When you finally decide that living without security is unacceptable, your behavior has to change. That refusal is the specific mechanism that forces you to transition from a passive consumer into an active owner. Building this kind of wealth plays out in a predictable drama, divided into 3 distinct seasons. The first season is spring. The primary objective is not immediate riches, but planting seeds of financial knowledge and forming the foundational habit of paying yourself first. Then comes summer, spanning from your 30s to your 60s. This is the critical window where the seeds of knowledge you planted in spring sprout into exponential growth. While your income line rises as you advance in your career, keep your expense line completely flat. This creates a massive surplus. Systematically invest it to capture the power of compounding, where your money generates its own earnings, accelerating your wealth over time. The greatest threat to this curve is the temptation to consume your surplus. If you spend that money to impress your neighbors, you destroy the financial shield that compounding was meant to build. In your 60s, you enter the fall. This is the harvest season, where the financial choices you made over several decades yield their final results. If you took the path of least resistance, consuming your surplus during summer, you will likely be forced to continue working a job you don't want, carrying financial anxiety well into your old age. These charts represent the long-term results of staying in the market and letting your investments compound. If you apply an owner's mindset, this data translates into total autonomy. You gain the freedom to spend your time however you choose. The only true barrier standing between you and your future wealth is the daily habits you choose to construct. There's a time for sharpening tools, a time for hard labor, and a time for reaping rewards. By rejecting mediocrity and strictly adhering to the seasons of wealth, you create the conditions for financial excellence. Protecting your family and achieving autonomy becomes the aggregate result of the habits you protect.